Hey, everybody. Welcome to the At Cause podcast. My name is Nelson Anderson, founder of Full Sail Media. And over here, I got my guy,
Kevin Kukar, Chief Creative Officer of Full Sail Media. Good afternoon or evening or good morning, depending on when you're listening to this. Welcome to the show.
All right. So today, I changed my shirt.
You changed your shirt, so it's a different day.
Shirt for you. It's a different day. It's 85 degrees and I'm wearing a hoodie. But we won't talk about that.
It's only 20 minutes. You'll sweat through it. You'll be fine.
Totally. I'll get through it. I'm a big boy. So today we're going to talk about, what are we talking about?
We're talking about hiring and a little bit of team building.
Okay, team building. Because?
Well, I've been in the midst of hiring and team building conversations for the last several weeks, so I've been having some personal experience with it, and I thought it would be an interesting topic.
Yeah, totally agree. I think that's also, not that we're necessarily experts in it. I think we just want to share, what we've been going through, what we're seeing, and some things that we've learned here recently.
Absolutely.
Because it's dynamic. It's changing like every minute. I mean, 6 months ago, we weren't getting any resumes in. Because it just nobody was looking for a job. It seemed like and now like everybody's looking for a job. So
well, it changes. It ebbs and it flows. I mean, a while ago, not that long ago, we would have been talking about pre-pandemic hiring versus post-pandemic hiring and what's the new normal and what's happening in the job market. And I think if you're tuned into what the conversation is, just a few weeks ago, we were talking about how there are way more jobs than there are people for jobs. And now all of a sudden there are people back in the workforce. There's, a term out there. People are talking about quiet quitting or the great resignation. I think the employment landscape has changed dramatically over the last a couple of years. And it's become a really interesting conversation when you talk about finding talent to bring on board. Now, to your point, there are resumes absolutely coming in, but it's more a question for me about where you're hiring from, like what the context of how you're hiring from is. Like if you're going out and job hunting, which, we've been in a conversation about bringing on new talent, there is this propensity to go into the conversation maybe from a little bit of fear, a little bit of scarcity, a little bit of lack, like I've got to fill this position. Yeah. We've got a real need. And my experience so far tells me that when I go into the conversation in that mode, that it colors how I approach the conversation, how I ask questions, what I ask, the things that I might be willing to overlook about an applicant, or red flags that might pop up that I'm like, well, that maybe not so bad, or we can get around that if I'm coming at it from a context of fear, lack, scarcity. Rather than coming at it from the context of what do I want to build that is built on possibility, that's built on growth, that's built on what's really good for the team. And I think level setting, when you step into a conversation about team building and about hiring people, just level setting where you're coming from makes a big difference in how you approach the situation. So it is a really dynamic conversation right now. It is a really, an interesting time for team building, but I like to make sure that I'm coming at the conversation from growth and possibility and what's good for the team, over and above anything else.
Yeah. What have you seen? We talked a little macro there of like over the course of years. What are you seeing different, in the past months?
People are coming back to work.
Right.
I mean, what's interesting is employers now have to be savvy about what they're offering to be competitive in the job landscape. It's less about, well, not less about, but it's interesting that for a long time, employers held all the cards, right? We've got the job, we've got the income stream, we've got your livelihood, come to us. And now the employee, the new hire, the person that's joining your team, they get to call a little bit more of the shots, for lack of a better term. Like there is a climate where they can ask for things that they maybe didn't necessarily have the guts to ask for before, whether it's work from home time, whether it's things that improve work-life balance, whether it's perks and benefits that they want as part of their compensation package. And it's even talking about their compensation package more openly and honestly about where they need to be,
Right.
To consider a position. And in my experience is that the conversation is a lot more vivid and a lot more candid now than maybe it was a couple of years ago. And it's really interesting to be in these conversations. And it's really interesting to be carving out packages for people where we can give work from home perks, or where we can make a hybrid scenario happen, or where we can find a little extra capital to put into the mix for an employee that we really think is worth taking a risk on. It has really been an interesting time to be in the conversation.
Totally. So one of the things that I've been thinking about, this might be a little controversial, but
I'll take it.
But how do you think that, for some of the maybe warehouse jobs, manufacturing jobs, where these salaries are rising and it outpaces what a company can pay for a position and or charge for their product? Are you seeing? What are some shifts going on? Do you see any shifts going on in that arena? Like, are they sending it offshore? Are they simply doing without and asking for more out of the same, or automating process?
I think it has. And sorry for jumping in. I'm just excited by the
come on.
topic. But when we talk about, I think the first thing that happens is to meet people where they're at specifically from a salary perspective. It drives up the costs of goods and services in a big way. I think everybody has, we're seeing that right now. That things are more expensive now than they have been in a very long time. I think that we just heard today that, in fact, that the Fed added 0.75% to another interest hike for the third time to keep up. And costs of goods and services are going up, and a lot of that has to do with talent acquisition, and asking for higher salaries means they got to find the revenue somewhere.
Right.
So they're passing it on to the customer, they're passing it on to the consumer, for sure. I think that there's also a drive to find other things that you can add to an employee's package that make you an attractive employer. Whether it's there's been for a while, and it continues on today, a big trend of unlimited PTO or time off. To take unlimited vacation time is a big driver. People are looking for it. Working from home, the majority of your schedule is a big driver. I think that people are, to keep costs down, are looking for other ways to devise packages that are competitive. And I think that there will be more of that.
Yeah, definitely. So how does you mentioned teamwork at the beginning of this, right?
Yeah.
How does that tie into hiring? How does teams play into hiring?
I think when I'm on the hiring hunt, I'm trying to be considerate that I'm looking for not only the next great hire, the next great employee, but I'm looking for the next great coworker.
Right.
And that comes from finding a culture fit for your organization. And I think hiring from culture fit is, I think it's the norm now. I think it's been a big part of a conversation in hiring circles and human resources for a long time, is looking for a good culture fit. To do that, you've got to actually do the work at home. You've got to do the work at your company to know your vision, your mission, your values as an organization. And when we talk about vision and mission and values, and I think we've talked about it on this podcast before, but vision is where you're going. Yeah. Mission is how you're getting there, and values are the things that you're bringing along with you on that trip, right? Mm-hmm. So like, it's California, it's a car trip, and it's the things that I'm packing in the trunk that are important to me. Yeah. And I think that hiring people who share your vision not your vision, your core values is super important, because they're going to be a good culture fit. And if you look at, for example, for Full Sail's culture, right? We start with helping other people to be successful.
Right.
When you're
That's number one.
That's number one.
That's right.
That's number one. When
I'm just so happy that you remembered that, Kevin.
helping other people be successful. I know that one for sure. If you test me on all 5 of them, I will stumble a little bit. But in all seriousness, when you are interviewing a candidate, it's helpful to ask questions that are leading, that search for, are their values in line with our values? Will they make a good coworker for the team?
Yeah.
Ask questions about how they view being helpful directly, how they view being helpful to other people. How they've in their previous work experience, where have they found an opportunity to be of maximum service to their coworkers, is a great way to gauge, is this person going to be a great coworker for our team?
Yeah.
And I think by that your core values, and if you haven't done them, please do the exercise. Get with somebody who is a professional at helping you build your mission, vision, and values. We're here for you, absolutely, at Full Sail if you want to get into that conversation. But then ask questions that are purposefully aligned with your core values so that you can get maximum value out of the conversation.
Gotcha. That's great. That's great. How do you manage a conversation when somebody, like, right off the gate that they don't align with your core values? What's the tell, number one, and then how do you politely exit?
Well, I think honestly, the tells are different in every conversation.
Yep.
Interviews are fantastic. I mean, interviews are opportunities to get in relationship with a person. And I think that I have a lot of fun when I'm in an interview.
Yep.
I enjoy being in interviews. I enjoy conversations about what people are up to in the world and what they're contributing, what their impact that they're having on the world is.
Right.
But when you ask a direct conversation about values, look for honest answers that come from the heart. I always say mind the gaps, right?
Yeah.
If there's a moment where they're like, well, I don't have an answer for that question, that's a tell. If they answer the question kind of cagey or canned, that's a tell.
Right.
If they're actually sharing with you an anecdote or a story from their personal experience, then that's the other kind of tell, and that's
Right.
great.
Yeah. A positive tell.
A positive tell, right? When they're coming at it from their own personal experience, I think that that's really important. But also remember that it's a high pressure situation for the other person. When you're interviewing a person, there are nerves involved in the situation.
I'm sweating right now.
Okay,
I don't know if it's a hoodie or I feel like I'm being interviewed.
So when you're talking to a person, have compassion for where they're at and
Yep.
make sure that you're asking questions that they can access easily and lead them into the conversation. But also level set with them that, like, I'm going to ask you some questions about core values, which might feel weird. They're really just to see if you're a good fit with our culture.
Right.
And there is no such thing as a perfect answer, but I'd love to hear personal experience.
Yep.
And lead them in that way. And I think that that will benefit you in the conversation.
Yeah, great. Now you have to answer the other part of the conversation.
I've forgotten it already.
And that is, how do you politely exit?
I'll be
it's not
honest
a
with
fit.
you, and I think people have overheard it because we work in a small office, and I've done some preliminary interviews, and they have ended quickly.
When Kevin comes out of the conference room in 5 minutes, I'm like, well, that was a quick interview.
I think it's really important to level set with qualifying questions straight out, right?
Yeah.
Like, I think it's really important to be honest about things like, what is the compensation for a position?
Right.
What are the expectations for the position? Like, for example, we're offering one work at home day.
Yeah.
We need you to come into the office for the other, the other part of the schedule. By asking specific qualifying questions, you can get specific qualifying answers back. And sometimes those answers are really obvious that it's not a good match.
Yeah.
And the thing is it's okay to say to a person, and I fully believe it because their time is valuable to them, and it
100%.
should be valuable to you. It's completely okay to say, I just want to be clear that this doesn't seem like it's the ideal fit based on that answer or those answers. We're going to keep you in mind if you'd like us to for maybe a potential other opportunity in the future, but I'm not going to take this to a second round interview. I'm a big fan of layering your interviews to be qualifying interview and then to be a little bit more in-depth interview, and then an interview with the person that they're probably going to be working for, their manager.
Your
I think
direct
that
report,
those three, those three interviews are really important. And I do believe that you want to get through all of your qualifying candidates before you start plugging in your, say, top 10 candidates for going a little bit deeper. And sometimes it's just like your top 3 or 4. And from there, you know the 2 that you're going to bring in to talk to their potential manager.
Right.
I think that also brings up a really good point, though, that when you're hiring, you should involve your team.
Yeah.
Like, it doesn't happen in a vacuum. There are insights, and I made this mistake recently, where we opened a position in kind of a vacuum. We knew that there was a need. We went out and found the ideal candidate, and it took a few weeks to find the ideal candidate. And the candidate worked with us for a short period of time, and I won't go into why that was. But what I noticed was the team that we work with came back to me after this person had offboarded and said, you know what, I have an interest in that role. Yeah. And what struck me is I didn't do a good job as a manager to say, hey, we're actually going to be looking for this position over here. And not only to ask if people were potentially interested in it, but to glean feedback about how to build that, right? Yep. I don't think people necessarily go into job or applicants with a clear job description, but what an opportunity to create a job description by actually asking the people that are going to work with that person to help them craft what are the needs, where are the gaps. And I think that that's really important, that you should involve your team in the process of team building. Totally. So that they feel invested in the conversation. It shouldn't happen just in a vacuum.
Right, right. And I love what you said about, putting it out also for the team to raise their hand. I mean, we've had that many times where they're like, well, I would love to throw my hat in the ring for that position.
Absolutely.
And we always want to grow from within, promote from within, and bring them up the ladder.
Absolutely.
So that's a really good point. That's something 100%. That sometimes we forget about.
Yeah.
And because we're so focused on, I need somebody for this position.
And that comes back to the context from which you're hiring. Take a breath, take a beat. Yep. We're looking for a web developer position that is, as a future hire right now. And I think I have 100 people that have applied in the last 2 days for this position. Wow. I got to pause the position so that I can actually thoughtfully look through the materials that I've got to look through. And I think taking that pause and coming at it from that context of I'm here to build to find the next coworker for our team makes a big difference when you're coming at it from that perspective.
I love it. Kevin, thank you so much for running us through that.
Absolutely.
And appreciate your patience and time that you take with all these potential candidates. It really makes a difference.
It's a lot of fun.
And it takes a special person, and you're just that person. So thank you for that.
Thanks for it.
Hey, thanks for joining us, guys, at the At Cause podcast. And you can hit us up on social media at fullsail.media. Thank you so much.